It is 9 o'clock, and we will begin. On our second prayer list, I want to just mention a few updates in regard to Dawn Poole, sister of Gordon and Doug. She was admitted to the hospital with heart issues. She passed away. I believe it was yesterday, wasn't it, Doug? Last night. And so we don't know the arrangements yet, but please keep Doug and Gordy in your prayers, losing their sister. This was your only sister. Okay, so now it's just the three boys. Okay. All right. Remember Melina Presley had surgery. She's home. She's recuperating, doing very well. Probably will be here this morning, but try to avoid hugging her because she's kind of touchy yet. And please remember that. Aaron Shuey, who's related to Diane and them, is doing better. Mike Parker's going to be having surgery April the 28th, Mobile Infirmary. Let's keep Mike in our prayers. Lisa Benzinger is doing better. Steve Hill's doing better. And Charles and Brenda Massey are here this morning. They're doing better. We're grateful for that. Ann Tomlin has been moved to the, the Gulf Coast Health and Rehabilitation on Greelot Road. It's really just around the corner from us. I didn't realize it was there, but it's a really nice facility. So let's be mindful of all of these. Anyone else that we need to have an addition? All right, well, let's go to God on behalf of these folks. Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for every blessing of life and for the fact that through the relationship that we have with Thee, that we can call upon Thee as our Father, that Thou will hear our prayers and will grant the blessings that are needed. We are so thankful for Thy love and Thy affection. We're grateful for Thy word, which guides us as we go about our journey here below. But especially are we thankful for all of those that are loved ones, the sick, the afflicted, those who have died, that Thou would be merciful and would touch their hearts in such a way that they'll find peace and calm and comfort in Thee. We thank Thee, dear Lord, for David and his family. And though they're out of town this weekend, we ask Thy blessings to be upon them, that they'll be safe and that they'll be back with us once again very soon. Bless our class this morning, that the things that we may say may be encouraging, uplifting, and upbuilding to Thee and to all of Thy people. Forgive us now, dear Lord, we pray all in the name of Christ. And amen. All right. Well, David asked me if I'd finish out the first chapter of Job, and I said, I think Mike can handle that. We just wanted to make a few observations on the verses 13 through 19, and then close out with that last 2-3 verses that we find there. Job is one of the most interesting characters in all of the Bible. And I want to say this because I think with all that you and I go through in life, all of our ups and our downs, our struggles, our highs, our lows, we find in Job a kindred spirit. Job went through the very same thing. And it's interesting, as we read here in this first chapter, God refers to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He knew what kind of a servant Job was. He knew what kind of heart Job had. He knew that when the going got tough, Job was going to be one of those that got going. He knew he could count on him. And I think about that phrase. And what better statement could it be made about us if we could write our own epitaph and put it on our graveside, our head marker. God saying, my servant. Would there need to be said any more? That says it all, doesn't it? And that was God's estimation of Job. But it's interesting, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things here. In regards to, Job was living his life as best he could with a relation with God. When Satan comes along, Satan says, God, he says, you know why Job serves you? He says, you've built a hedge. He said, you have surrounded Job, and this is just, he can't but help do this. God says, so you think that's right? He said, well, Satan, he said, you can do whatever you will, but you can't touch the life of Job. You can't take away his life. And so watch what happens. In the verses 13 through 19, 4 different groups come against him and take away his stock, he was one of the wealthiest men of the East. All of that's gone. He had 10 children. They're gone. They're now dead. He was married with his wife, had a great number of things. All of these things have been taken from him. This is Satan unleashing his wrath against Job. He's trying to tear that hedge down that he accused God of building. But when we conclude with this, we're going to find what Job's attitude was. So let's notice, let's read verses 13 through 19. And when there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing, and the she-asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only have escaped alone to tell thee. And while that one's talking, behold, while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God is falling from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away, yea, and have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and only I am escaped alone to tell thee. So here is rapid fire. Bing, 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 bing. All this happens to Job, and the reports are coming in. One doesn't even finish his report when the next one tells him what else is happening. Put yourself in Job's shoes for just a moment. How would you feel? How would I feel? That would be quite a sorrow to overcome, to hear that he's lost all of his wealth, it's gone. All of his family, it's gone. his servants, all of that. It's gone. It's disappeared. I remember when I was a little bit younger, I can't remember, but I guess it was about 20, maybe 25 years ago, that the stock market was falling, and there was a tremendous drop in one day. And I remember hearing on the news, especially in Miami and different places like that, that people were jumping off of skyscrapers because they had invested and they just had lost a great sum of money. And that's how some people reacted. They took their life. I don't know if that thought ever entered into Job's mind. I doubt that it did. But knowing that people respond in different ways, what would happen to you if your house were to burn and your cars are destroyed, your family is taken away from you, and all of this, and it all happens within just a matter of a very short period of time? How would any of us feel? I think that this is put in here for a reason, because sometimes it would be good for us to stop and say, okay, put myself in those shoes. What would I do? How would I respond? I'm not sure I could respond as Job did. Now let me tell you why. Beginning in verse 20 through 22, then Job arose and rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down to the ground and worshipped, and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord hath taken, the Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Amidst all of this tranquility that was taking place, what did Job do? Verse 20 says, Job arose, he rent his mantle, he shaved his head. By the way, these are two ways that oftentimes the Old Testament describes when a person was really grieving and in deep sorrow. They would tear their clothes off, at least the upper garments, and shave their head, showing the deep grief and sorrow that they were going through. Genesis 37:28 and Isaiah 7:20 are just two of the verses that would demonstrate that for us. But Job doing that, and the first thing he does is he falls down upon the ground, and he does what? He worships. What frame of mind do we need to be in when we worship God? This is very important. We try to get our mind settled. This is the Lord's day. I'm going to be among like men and women of like precious faith, and I need to be sober, and life's not all a joke. It's not all just happiness. Now, there's some good things that are happening, but I need to be serious. When I sing these songs, I need to be taking those words to my heart, so that when I sing blessed assurance, as David talked with us about, I can really say, blessed is the assurance that we have. And so we have to prepare our hearts and our minds for worship. Job, immediately upon hearing these things, he fell down to the ground and he worshiped God. I'll tell you, I think Job was much stronger in character than any of us maybe have ever attributed to him. And do you suppose that this is perhaps a reason why God said to Satan when he was going about to and fro on the face of the earth, and he says, you know, he was just distraught, and there wasn't any more work for him to do that he saw, and God said, have you considered my servant Job? You think there's a connection there? Evidently there is. So amazingly, Job arose and tore his robe, which was a demonstration of great grief and sorrow, and shaved his head, which was another degree of that, fell down upon the ground, and he worshiped God. Worshiped. When we worship, what do? We sort of put other things out of our mind, don't we? Now remember, he's just lost his wealth, his family, everything that Job owned is now gone. Just he and his wife. And he immediately worships. He's of such mind that he can worship God. Friends, I think that speaks volumes to us. If Job can do that, can we not today? Now, yes. Now, the reason that these accounts were told Job, what was Satan trying to do? What did he accuse God of building around him? He's tearing that hedge down. So what does he do? Immediately, Job finds himself, none of these are in his possession anymore. But that's not what made Job the character that he was. It was his love for God and his desire to do his will. Immediately upon hearing of that, he was able to clear his mind and worship God. Don't you find that astronomical? Really? I mean, we might say, well, we're not the richest people in the world. You know, we don't have a great large bank account. We don't have all this and that. So let's just look at ourselves. If that were to happen to us, would we be able to kind of clear our mind and worship God? Just the fact that it says that happened speaks volumes about the character of Job. Why he's in the Bible and why we're studying about him. Because these are tremendous, tremendous insights about him. Now, when all of this happened, and particularly when the loss of his children and that, and when he found out that he didn't have any of these possessions, after he fell down and he worshiped God, Job feels like that he is virtually reduced to the day when he was born, the day of his birth. And so what does he exclaim about that? Watch this next verse. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Being reduced to that state, Job was able to put in perspective what was really important in life. Sometimes, you read words and you just try to reflect upon them and allow them to sink. I don't know what more that could be said here about Job than what these few statements say about him. What character this man went through. And Job, I keep calling him David. Job wasn't born that way, was he? None of us are born with that. Those are things that we learn through life, through experiences, through education. We learn about these things. And so Job went through the very same avenues to learn this that we go through today. Our parents teach us values and things within the home, and we have experiences as we grow up and reach the age where we can interact with other people and communicate. We go to school and we are imparted wisdom that teaches us how to use this which God gave us, how we can think about things and reason and respond. And through all of these means, we develop into the character that we are. What does that say about Job? And the fact that he could immediately respond by saying, you know, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. Looking at the very beginning and towards the ending of life. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So the things that are emphasized here is the fact that when he worships the Lord, think about the confidence that he has in God. Think about the things that he realizes and the confidence, the security, we might say, that is experienced. He had in the Lord, and he thought a great deal about that confidence. And it's not just one way. He had confidence in the Lord. But didn't the Lord have confidence in Job? He sure did. Have you considered my servant? I wonder if God were to go about today, as he did in this time frame, which we believe is the patriarchal age, would God say, have you considered my servant Clifford, or Robert, or Patrick, or Charles, Kevin, James, Glenn, Nat, Doug, Lowell, Corey? I drew a blank there for a minute, Corey. Would he say that about us? And so I have to stop and ask myself, if he wouldn't, why wouldn't he? What's wrong? What's the problem? And I think that's quite a statement, that God had confidence not only in Job, but Job had confidence in God. And Job will say a little bit later on, though he slay me, yet shall I live. Though all of these things are going to happen, and though death is going to take place, and I'm going to lay aside this physical machinery, it's going to be silenced one day. I realize that. Okay? And so in all of this, when we think about Job and what his attitude was, his character, it just stands out as astronomical. Any questions, comments? That's right. And Job realized that, didn't he? Ultimately, Job knew that God was in control. So Job says, I have to live my life in harmony with his will all the time. And so certainly that's very true, Glenn, that we're going to have the highs and the lows, and that hopefully that we're living our life. And what is one of the things that we have access to today that the Bible assures us of, which helps us in times like that? It's spelled Grace. Grace. Grace is favor that I don't merit. There's nothing I can do to inherit it, that after I've done this, then God owes it to me. It is that which is a blessing, a favor that comes from God, but it helps me in my weaknesses. If I'm walking in the light, as He's in the light, if I'm in daily fellowship with God, I'm going to have the grace of God, which is going to help me with my imperfections. Glenn, if it was not for that, none of us would make it, would we? Not one. We need that grace. We need those blessings, those provisions that God has made for us. Okay? Anything else from anyone? In summing up this first chapter, I've got about three things I'd like to mention, like for us to talk about just a little bit. There are some remarkable things that, in my estimation, must be noted. Number one, God's sovereignty be recognized. How did Job recognize God's sovereignty? What did he state in this first chapter? The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Does the Lord have the right to do that? Yeah, He has the right. Because He is sovereign over all life, is He not? Not only is He sovereign over all life, does He care about our life? Certainly He does. He cares as much about our life today as He did Job, His servant. That care has not diminished, not one bit. And so the fact that he recognized that the Lord can give and the Lord can take away, because He is sovereign. He owns everything in this universe. A cattle on 1,000 hills, 1,000 cattle on the hills. The rivers and all that are in them. Everything belongs to God. And basically, He has lent it to us for a period of time for our what? Why do we have these things? Why do we have green grass and trees and flowers? Yeah. This is the way God has beautified the earth. Does God need that to recognize beauty? Not at all. But He did that for us, for all of us, and can appreciate, those various things. So God is sovereign over all things because He is the maker of all things. Now, that may sound easy to say, but is God sovereign over our bank accounts? Is He sovereign over our homes? Over our automobiles? I'm just emphasizing now some physical things. Okay? Certainly He is. Is He sovereign over our life? Absolutely. Whose lives? All lives. That's why later on in the Ten Commandments, it was wrong to thou shalt not kill. Well, the word kill there actually would be translated murder. And the reason being, it's not always wrong to kill, is it? How many of you men have ever in the fall of the year gone deer hunting? Is it wrong to kill a deer? No. Now, just to kill a deer so that you could say you killed a deer and just leave things, no, it was never intended to be that. But it can be food and various things. What do you do when you catch a fish? You take its life, don't you? Any of you like a good steak? I do. Well, where does that steak come from? It came from a beef. That beef had to give its life. So it's not always wrong to kill. But listen, friends, the word murder is always wrong because there is no just cause. Who is in position to say that someone else has a right to live or not live? Now, God gives that authority where? To the government and to those authorities. No single person ever has a right to determine that. And so when we think about this, then what does that do for these babies that are being aborted and killed? That's why it's murder. Murder is always wrong. There's no justification for murder. Okay? And so God certainly is sovereign over all things. Secondly, Job does not complain, nor does he blame anyone. I wonder what Congress would do if someone were to go up there and just open the book of Job and begin reading. I wonder if they would recognize that this is really out of place here because this doesn't really describe us. In Washington, D.C., nobody accepts responsibility for what they do. Now, that's not limited to Washington. We have it right here in Montgomery, in state government. Do we have it here in local government? Yeah. Right here in Mobile. Nobody wants to accept responsibility. Always blame it on the other person. The other person made me do it. I remember I was living in Bay Minette at the time, but at Ted Bundy. When Ted Bundy was about to be executed, he was in over here at Atmore in the federal prison for a while, and then was moved to northwest Florida. And I remember James Dobson was allowed permission to interview him before he was on death row, and they were about to take his life. And when he asked Ted Bundy about these things, he said, listen, he said, I'm not responsible. He said, society made me do it. And that made me madder than a wet hen. I didn't know Ted Bundy, and I don't remember a thing I did that made him do what he did. That's a cop-out. When people say, well, somebody else, because they didn't do this caused a chain reaction. No, what we need to do is we just need to admit when things don't go our way that maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe I need to go back and look through that. Job never complained. He never blamed God. He didn't blame these people that came to him, these 4 rapid succession reports that he got. What does that say about an individual that doesn't complain but tries to live within the framework of a particular government or circumstance or situation? What does that say about a person? I've been lecturing enough. It's time for you all to have some input now. What do you think about that? Do you resent God because he tells you what to do through his word? No. It's not always easy to do because there's some choices that we have to make, and sometimes those choices are not easy to make. As to, am I going to faithfully serve the Lord? Have I counted the cost? We're going to talk about some of those things in the next hour. But yes, God certainly has given us wise counsel. He's given us wisdom as to how we should think and feel and act. And yet, sometimes those still fall on deaf ears, don't they? And even with a Christian, it's not always easy to just be able to renounce the world and just do the things that we know needs to be done. And no one has ever said that it is easy. But I think it's interesting that Job doesn't try to play the blame game. It's not always somebody else's fault. And I think that speaks great sums about him. Last of all, Job has justified the Lord in him, and Satan's blows against him backfired. You know, in the account in the Gospels, when Jesus stood with the disciples and with Peter and that, he said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." He knew how Satan works, okay? How would it be if when we're tempted or when we are faced with a very challenging situation and we were to say, "Satan, get behind me," so that we can focus and we can think about what it is before us, and we can put all of our energy and our mind and devote it to what needs to be done. And Satan, you're going to have to get behind me. I don't have time to deal with you right now. I'm dealing with the Lord. Job was able to do that. And did Job know that it was Satan that was doing all of this to him? See, we don't know where Job was when Satan was walking to and fro on the face of this earth, and God says to him, what's the matter, Satan? And he said he'd walk to and fro, and the implications there, and he said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" I don't know that Job was right there and that God was saying, "Have you considered this one, my servant?" I kind of get the idea that maybe Job wasn't right there in the immediate presence when this was taking place. So when he learned after the fact, he didn't blame Satan. He didn't blame everyone else for his mistakes. He justified the Lord. The Lord had confidence in Job. Job had confidence in the Lord, that what the Lord said he would do. And that Job was willing to take that to his grave. Now, we talk about commitment. And I remember a few years ago, the group of people started talking about total commitment and was trying to take that phrase and abuse it. There's nothing wrong with the phrase total commitment. That's really what it requires of us. Are we totally committed? Are we going to do the Lord's will, or are we just going to play a game with it? And that's really what's at stake. Job, in his speaking of the Lord here, justified him in what was done. And all of the blows of Satan, when we justify the Lord in our lives, Satan will never be victorious. It doesn't matter what we're faced with. When we justify Jehovah, and he is the one that's living in us and guiding us and instructing us. Remember, it was Solomon that said in the Proverbs, "O Lord, it is not in the way of man to direct his steps." Not Solomon, that's Jeremiah 10:23. He realized that God is going to direct the steps of his people. Do we recognize that? Job did. Job had that kind of understanding. And when he justified God in his life, he knew, now God's not at fault at this. This is just something that I need to face up and deal with, and I can be made stronger by dealing with it. And that's what Job did. Anything from anyone? Yes. And it's easy to always blame someone else, never accepting responsibility. Isn't that what children do oftentimes? Well, he did it. He started it first. Well, he took this away from me. You know, but we grow out of that, or we should grow out of that. And when we do become the true spiritual people that God desires for us to be, we'll reason like that. Sometimes, you know, we may just admit, I made a mistake. You know, I created a blunder here. I'm responsible. And oftentimes, even if it was somebody else's mistake, does it make us feel better when we can say, well, somebody else did that. That's not my doing. It's still wrong. And if it affected our lives, what do we have to do? We have to fix it. We have to take care of it, straighten it out. And so and this is the whole character of Job. You see, that wasn't what Job was all about. Well, you know, Satan did this, and he worked through these people, and the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans, and all of this and that, and they just need to go back home and mind their own business. No, Job didn't say any of that. Why? Because Job was reasoning on a higher level. What can I learn from this? Not why has this happened, but what can be learned. And I guarantee you, friends, when you and I can take the question of what happens to us in life, various things, and turn it around and say, why has this happened, and what can I learn from it? We're going to find ourselves being strengthened in the Lord. We're going to have a much better understanding of things that happen and transpire, and it's going to strengthen our relationship with God. When Christ came to the cross and died, did he point his finger and he said, you and you and you and you and you, you're responsible for this. This is not of my doing. No. He came willingly, didn't he? Because there was something that needed to be done. In a sense, the Lord was justifying God, wasn't he? And when you and I seek to do that in our lives, things are going to be changed. We're going to have a much better understanding of what's taking place in life. And we're going to find an inner strength that comes because the more that we read and the more we see those very principles, the more they're going to strengthen us and make us into the character like Job. Okay? We've got about 40 seconds left. Anything from anyone? Any observation you'd like to make? Aren't you thankful for Job and for all the things that Job has to say and how that can affect us in our lives? Yes. Glenn, I can't help but think, in Romans 15:4, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. Does that include the book of Job? These things were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, may have hope. Well, time has caught us. So David will be back, and he's going to start chapter 2 next week. Thank you for your good attention.